The thunderous sound of hooves hitting packed earth echoed across the New Mexico landscape, as a woman's scream pierced the afternoon air. Josephine Calloway had never imagined her life would end this way, dragged across the rugged terrain by her own spooked horse. Her foot caught painfully in the stirrup, while the panicked animal galloped at breakneck speed away from Fort Stanton. The year was 1878, and the New Mexico Territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Josephine had come west 3 months prior following the death of her father, determined to make a new life for herself as the schoolteacher in Fort Stanton. At 22 years old, she possessed a fierce independence that had served her well in the classroom, but did little to help her current predicament. Her chestnut mare, normally so steady and reliable, had been spooked by a rattlesnake that had slithered across their path during what was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon ride. The sudden rearing had thrown Josephine from the saddle, but her right foot had become entangled in the stirrup. Now, as the horse charged wildly ahead, all she could do was desperately try to protect her head from the rocks and brush that threatened to dash her brains out with each terrible bounce. "Help!" she screamed again, though she knew it was futile. She had ridden far from town, seeking solitude after a difficult week of teaching. No one would hear her cries. Her back scraped against the rough ground, her dress torn to shreds, exposing her skin to the merciless terrain. Blood trickled from countless cuts and abrasions, and the pain was becoming unbearable. The world started to fade at the edges of her vision. Consciousness was a luxury she would soon be unable to afford. Just as Josephine was about to surrender to the encroaching darkness, she heard the sound of another horse, this one approaching rapidly from behind. Through the cloud of dust and the blur of her own tears, she caught a glimpse of a powerful palomino gaining on her runaway mare, and atop it, a man leaning dangerously from his saddle. "Hold on," came a deep voice, carried on the wind. Riley Kincaid had been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on local livestock when he heard the screams. At 30 years old, he'd spent most of his adult life as a ranch hand and sometimes bounty hunter, developing the kind of horseback skills few men possessed. Today, those skills would be tested like never before. Urging his stallion forward, Riley closed the gap between himself and the runaway horse. He could see the woman's body bouncing violently against the ground, her honey blonde hair matted with dust and blood. Her face, what he could see of it, was contorted in pain and fear. "I'm coming," he shouted, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. With expert precision, Riley maneuvered his horse alongside the panicked mare. The ground beneath them was becoming increasingly treacherous as they approached the foothills where rocks jutted out like daggers waiting to claim a victim. He knew he had mere seconds to act before the woman was killed. In one fluid motion, Riley drew the knife from his belt, leaned perilously from his saddle, and slashed the leather of the stirrup that held the woman captive. The tension released immediately, and Josephine tumbled to a stop while the spooked horse continued its frenzied gallop into the distance. Riley pulled his horse to a sharp halt, dismounted before it had fully stopped, and ran back to where Josephine lay motionless on the ground. Dropping to his knees beside her, his heart pounded with fear that he'd been too late. "Madam," he said, gently turning her onto her back. "Can you hear me?" Josephine's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of a summer sky. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her once fine blue dress was now little more than rags clinging to her battered body. "The horse," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Gone, but you're safe now," Riley assured her, quickly assessing her injuries. "I need to get you to a doctor. Can you move your fingers and toes?" Josephine complied, wincing as she did so. "Everything hurts, but I think I'm in one piece," she managed to say. Riley nodded, relief washing over his sun-weathered features. "That's good. My name is Riley Kincaid. I've got a ranch about 3 miles east of here." "Josephine Calloway," she replied weakly. "I'm the school teacher in Fort Stanton. Miss Calloway, I'm going to have to pick you up now. It might hurt, but we need to get you some help." She nodded, and Riley slid his arms beneath her, lifting her as gently as possible. She couldn't suppress a cry of pain, and Riley murmured an apology as he carried her to his horse. "I'll need to ride behind you to keep you steady," he explained. "Can you hold on long enough to reach my ranch? My sister Martha is there. She knows a fair bit about doctoring." "I think so," Josephine said, though uncertainty laced her voice. With careful movements, Riley positioned her in the saddle, then mounted behind her, securing her against his chest with one strong arm while he took the reins with his free hand. Her body was warm against his, and despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help noticing the delicate scent of lavender that somehow persisted through the dust and blood. As they rode toward his ranch, Riley kept a steady stream of conversation flowing, partly to keep her awake and partly to distract her from the pain. "You're new to Fort Stanton, aren't you? I don't come to town much, but I'd remember if I'd seen you before." "I arrived in March," Josephine replied, her voice stronger than before. "After my father passed, there wasn't much keeping me in Boston." "Boston. You've come a long way, Miss Calloway. Please call me Josephine. I think after saving my life, you've earned the right to use my given name." Riley smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Josephine it is, and you can call me Riley." As they crested a small hill, a modest but well-maintained ranch came into view. A main house constructed of sturdy logs, a barn, and several outbuildings were arranged in a protective circle. Fields of grazing cattle stretched into the distance, and the snow-capped peaks of distant mountains provided a majestic backdrop. "Welcome to the Lazy K," Riley said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's beautiful," Josephine murmured, and Riley felt an unexpected surge of pride at her words. As they rode into the yard, a woman with the same striking green eyes as Riley emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression quickly shifted from welcome to concern as she took in the battered form of Josephine. "Martha," Riley called out. "This is Miss Josephine Calloway, the schoolteacher from Fort Stanton. She's been dragged by her horse. Can you help her?" Martha Kincaid, 5 years Riley's junior, sprang into action. "Bring her inside, quick. I'll prepare the guest room." Within minutes, Josephine was laid gently on a clean bed while Martha gathered medical supplies. Riley hovered in the doorway, reluctant to leave but aware of the impropriety of remaining while Martha tended to Josephine's wounds. "Go fetch some fresh water from the well," Martha instructed him, sensing his hesitation. "And then see about making some broth. She'll need to rebuild her strength." Grateful for the tasks, Riley nodded and left to do as he was told. As he worked, his mind kept returning to the woman now resting in his guest room. There was something about her that had struck him deeply, a courage and resilience that commanded respect. She had faced death with more dignity than many men he'd known, and that alone made her remarkable. Inside the house, Martha carefully cleaned Josephine's wounds, applying salves and bandages where needed. "You're lucky," she told the injured woman. "No broken bones that I can tell, though you'll be black and blue for weeks. That brother of mine got to you just in time." "He saved my life," Josephine said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever repay him." Martha smiled knowingly. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. The look on his face when he brought you in tells me he considers himself well compensated just by your survival." Josephine felt a blush creep into her cheeks despite her injuries. "You're teasing me." "Perhaps a little," Martha admitted, "but I know my brother." It's been a long time since I've seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you. Not since Elizabeth. Elizabeth? Josephine couldn't help asking. His wife, Martha said, her voice softening. She died in childbirth 5 years ago along with the baby. Riley hasn't been the same since. Keeps to himself mostly, just works the ranch and occasionally takes bounty jobs when money gets tight. Josephine's heart ached for the man who had saved her. I'm so sorry. Don't be, Martha said gently. What happened today, you needing his help, him being able to save you, I think it might be exactly what he's needed for a long time. Before Josephine could respond, Riley returned with a bucket of fresh water and news that broth was simmering on the stove. How is she? He asked his sister, his eyes finding Josephine's on the bed. She'll live, Martha assured him, though she shouldn't be moved for at least a few days. She needs rest to recover properly. I can't impose, Josephine protested weakly. I should return to Fort Stanton. The children will manage without you for a few days, Riley interrupted firmly. I'll ride into town tomorrow and let folks know what happened and that you're recovering here. It's the least I can do. Thank you, Josephine relented, too exhausted to argue further. The next day, true to his word, Riley rode into Fort Stanton. The small settlement was bustling with its usual mix of soldiers from the nearby fort, ranchers in town for supplies, and local residents going about their daily business. He made his way to the schoolhouse first, where he found a group of children waiting outside the locked door. A young boy of about 10 approached him warily. You looking for Miss Calloway, mister? She ain't here and it ain't like her to miss school. That's why I'm here, Riley explained. Miss Calloway had an accident yesterday. She's resting at my ranch, but she'll be all right in a few days. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by the time Riley had finished speaking with the mayor and purchased supplies at the general store, several concerned townspeople had approached him for more details. He assured them all that Josephine was in good hands and would return once she was well enough to travel. At the general store, the proprietor, a rotund man named Harold Billings, eyed Riley curiously as he selected items. Haven't seen you in town for a spell, Kincaid. Usually send your sister for supplies. Had reason to come myself today, Riley replied, adding a bolt of blue fabric to his purchases on impulse. That school teacher's a fine young woman, Billings commented, wrapping the fabric. Brought some civilization to this place since she arrived. The children adore her. She seems remarkable, Riley agreed, paying for his goods. Half the eligible men in town think so too, Billings added with a knowing look. Been quite a competition brewing to see who might court her successfully. Riley said nothing to this, but the information settled uncomfortably in his chest as he rode back to the ranch. Of course, someone like Josephine would have suitors. She was beautiful, educated, and kind. What had he been thinking? That she would have any interest in a rough rancher like himself, a widower still haunted by the ghosts of his past. When he returned home, he found Josephine sitting up in bed. Some color returned to her cheeks. Martha had helped her wash her hair and provided her with a clean nightgown. You look better, Riley said, standing awkwardly in the doorway with his parcels. I feel better, Josephine replied with a small smile. Your sister is a wonderful nurse. She learned from our mother, Riley explained. Before she passed, Ma was known as the best healer in 3 counties. He stepped forward hesitantly and placed the wrapped fabric on the foot of the bed. I thought you might need something to replace your dress. It was pretty well ruined yesterday. Josephine's eyes widened in surprise as she unwrapped the package to reveal the fine blue fabric. Riley, this is too generous. I can't accept such a gift. Please, he insisted. It's the least I can do. Martha can help you make it up into a new dress. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Something electric passed between them. Riley was the first to look away, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I should let you rest," he said, backing toward the door. "Wait," Josephine called. "What did they say in town? About my absence, they're concerned but understanding. The mayor said to take all the time you need to recover properly." Josephine nodded, relieved. "Thank you for going." "It was kind of you." "It was nothing," Riley assured her. "Get some rest now." Over the next several days, Josephine's strength gradually returned. By the fourth day of her stay, she was able to join Riley and Martha at the dinner table. Though she moved gingerly, her body still tender from the ordeal. Martha had indeed helped her fashion a simple but elegant dress from the blue fabric Riley had purchased, and she wore it now, her golden hair braided neatly down her back. "This is delicious," Josephine complimented, savoring a bite of Martha's beef stew. "Thank you," Martha beamed. "It's Riley's favorite. He shot the deer himself last week." "You hunt as well as ranch?" Josephine asked, looking at Riley with interest. "Have to out here," he replied modestly. "The land provides if you know how to ask it properly." "Riley's being humble," Martha interjected. "He's the best shot in the county. Used to win all the shooting competitions at the summer festival in town." "Used to," Riley emphasized, casting his sister a warning glance. Josephine sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "How long have you had this ranch?" "It was our father's," Riley explained, relaxing slightly at the change of subject. "He came out here in '49 before either of us was born, built everything you see with his own 2 hands. When he died 10 years ago, it passed to me." "It's a beautiful place," Josephine said sincerely. "You've maintained it well." "It's hard work," Riley admitted, "but worth it. There's a freedom out here you can't find back east." "I'm beginning to understand that," Josephine said softly. "When I first came to New Mexico, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Everything was so different from Boston, the landscape, the people, the way of life. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." "The West changes you," Riley agreed, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Gets under your skin in a way that's hard to explain to folks who haven't experienced it." "Exactly," Josephine said, surprised and pleased that he understood. "My friends back home thought I was mad to accept a teaching position out here. They warned me of Indians and outlaws and all manner of dangers. And instead, it was your own horse that nearly did you in," Martha observed Riley. The three shared a laugh, and for the first time since her accident, Josephine felt truly at ease. As the evening progressed, she found herself watching Riley when he wasn't looking, noting the way his green eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. How his strong hands moved with surprising gentleness as he passed dishes. The deep timbre of his voice as he recounted stories of ranch life. After dinner, Martha excused herself to wash the dishes, refusing Josephine's offer of help. "You're still recovering," she insisted. "Why don't you and Riley sit on the porch for a while? The evening air is pleasant and the sunset should be spectacular tonight." Riley seemed about to protest, but thought better of it, instead offering Josephine his arm. "If you're feeling up to it, I'd like that," she replied, taking his arm and allowing him to lead her outside. The porch of the ranch house faced west, providing a perfect view of the sun as it began its descent behind the distant mountains. Riley helped Josephine into a rocking chair, then took a seat beside her on the porch steps. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to a painter's palette of orange, pink, and purple hues. The vast New Mexico landscape stretched before them, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Josephine murmured. "Nor have I," Riley replied, though when she glanced at him, He was looking not at the sunset but at her. Their eyes held for a moment before Riley looked away, embarrassed to have been caught staring. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," Josephine assured him gently. She hesitated, then added, "Your sister told me about your wife. I'm so sorry for your loss, Riley." His jaw tightened, and for a moment Josephine feared she had overstepped. But then his shoulders relaxed and he sighed deeply. "Elizabeth was a good woman," he said simply. "She didn't deserve what happened to her." "No one does," Josephine agreed. "I lost my mother when I was young. It was just my father and me for many years. When he passed this winter, I felt adrift." "Is that why you came west? To find your bearings again?" Josephine considered the question. "Partly, but also to discover who I might be outside of my father's daughter. He was a professor at Harvard, a brilliant man, but domineering in his way. I loved him dearly, but in his shadow it was difficult to find my own light." "And have you found your light?" Riley asked softly. A small smile played at the corners of Josephine's mouth. "I'm beginning to. Teaching has been more rewarding than I expected. The children here are different from those in Boston, more self-reliant, more connected to the real world rather than just books." "Like their teacher," Riley observed. Josephine laughed. "Hardly. I was quite the sheltered academic before coming here. This," she gestured to her still healing body, "is evidence enough of how unprepared I was for frontier life." "Yet you survived," Riley pointed out. "Many wouldn't have." "Only because of you," she reminded him. "No," Riley said firmly. "I may have cut you free, but the strength that kept you holding on until I arrived, that came from within you, Josephine. Don't discount that." His words warmed her more than they should have. "Thank you for saying that." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, a cool breeze swept across the land. Josephine shivered involuntarily, and immediately Riley was on his feet. "You're cold. We should get you back inside." "Just a moment longer," she pleaded. "The stars are coming out." Riley hesitated, then shrugged off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her, along with the scent of him leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine. "Thank you," she murmured, drawing it closer around her. They watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, brilliant pinpoints of light against the deepening blue. One by one, constellations emerged, clearer and more numerous than Josephine had ever seen in the city. "You know their names?" she asked, tilting her head back to take in the celestial panorama. Riley followed her gaze upward. "Some. My father taught me a few when I was young. That's the Big Dipper there," he pointed. "And there's the North Star. Travelers have used it to find their way home for centuries." "Home," Josephine echoed, testing the word. "I'm not sure where that is for me anymore." "Perhaps you haven't found it yet," Riley suggested quietly. Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. But before either could speak, the front door opened and Martha appeared. "It's getting chilly out here," she announced. "I've made some hot chocolate if you're interested." The spell broken, Riley helped Josephine to her feet, careful not to pressure her still tender injuries. As they walked back into the warmth of the house, Josephine was acutely aware of his hand at the small of her back, steadying her, and of how reluctant she was to let the evening end. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Josephine woke feeling stronger than she had since the accident. After dressing in her new blue dress, she made her way to the kitchen where Martha was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Josephine greeted her. "Can I help with anything?" Martha looked up from the biscuit dough she was kneading, surprise evident on her face. "You're up early." "And looking much better, I might add." "I feel better," Josephine confirmed. "Good enough to make myself useful, I hope." Well, you could set the table if you're feeling up to it, Martha conceded, nodding toward a cupboard. Riley's already out doing chores, but he'll be in soon, hungry as a bear. As Josephine arranged plates and utensils on the simple oak table, she found herself wondering what Riley was doing at that moment. Was he feeding livestock? Mending fences? The realization that she knew so little about the day-to-day workings of ranch life made her feel suddenly inadequate. "What's troubling you?" Martha asked, noticing Josephine's furrowed brow. "I was just thinking. I know nothing about ranch life," Josephine admitted. "In Boston, our meat came from the butcher, our milk from the milkman. I've never even seen a cow milked." Martha laughed. "Well, that's easily remedied. Once you're fully recovered, I'm sure Riley would be happy to show you around the ranch." Before Josephine could respond, the back door opened and Riley stepped in, removing his hat as he entered. He stopped short when he saw Josephine, his expression one of pleasant surprise. "You're up," he said, stating the obvious. "Yes," she replied, feeling strangely shy. "I thought it was time I rejoined the land of the living." A smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "It's good to see you on your feet." Throughout breakfast, Josephine found her eyes repeatedly drawn to Riley. There was something compelling about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. Unlike the men she had known in Boston, who wore their education and social status like armor, Riley's strength seemed to come from within. "I was thinking," she ventured as Martha cleared the breakfast dishes, "that perhaps I could see a little of the ranch today. If you wouldn't mind showing me around." Riley looked hesitant. "Are you sure you're up for it? You've been through a lot." "I'm sure," Josephine insisted. "Just a short tour, perhaps. I've been cooped up inside for days, and the fresh air would do me good." "Well," Riley scratched his chin thoughtfully, "I suppose we could take a slow ride in the wagon. That would be easier on you than walking." "Perfect," Josephine beamed. An hour later, Josephine found herself seated beside Riley on the bench of a small wagon, a gentle breeze playing with loose strands of her hair as they trundled along a well-worn path. Riley pointed out various features of the ranch: the north pasture where the cattle grazed in summer, the creek that provided water even in the driest months, the stand of pine trees where he hunted deer in the fall. "It's much larger than I realized," Josephine commented, taking in the expanse of the Lazy K. 600 acres, Riley said with quiet pride. "Not the biggest spread in these parts, but good land, every bit of it. And you manage it all yourself, just you and Martha." "We hire hands during roundup and branding," Riley explained. "But day to day, yes, it's mostly just us. Been that way since Pa died." "It must be exhausting," Josephine observed. Riley shrugged. "It's the life I know. Can't imagine doing anything else, to be honest." As they crested a small hill, Riley pulled the wagon to a stop. Below them stretched a picture-perfect valley, a small lake at its center reflecting the clear blue sky. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Riley admitted. "I come here sometimes when I need to think." "I can see why," Josephine breathed, enchanted by the view. "It's like something from a painting." Riley climbed down from the wagon and came around to help Josephine descend. His hands were strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. When her feet touched earth, he didn't immediately let go, and she found herself looking up into his eyes, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Thank you," she murmured. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice lower than usual. Reluctantly, it seemed, he stepped back, gesturing toward a large flat rock near the edge of the hill. "Would you like to sit for a while?" Josephine nodded, and they settled side by side on the sun-warmed surface. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, watching as a hawk circled lazily overhead. I should return to Fort Stanton soon, Josephine said at last, though the words brought an unexpected pang. The school can't remain closed indefinitely. Of course, Riley agreed, though she thought she detected a note of regret in his voice. Perhaps tomorrow, if you feel strong enough, I can drive you in the wagon. That would be very kind, Josephine said. After a moment's hesitation, she added, I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already. It's been no imposition, Riley assured her quickly. Having you at the ranch has been pleasant, even though I've contributed nothing and required care. You've contributed more than you know, Riley said softly. When she looked at him questioningly, he elaborated, the ranch has felt different with you there, more like a home than just a place to work and sleep. The admission, simple as it was, made Josephine's heart flutter. I've felt at home there too, she confessed, more than I expected to. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a barrier lowered, a possibility acknowledged. Without conscious thought, Josephine found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't name. Riley's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he closed the distance between them. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a soft brush of lips, hesitant and sweet. Josephine's eyes fluttered closed as warmth spread through her body. Riley's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent as if she were made of the finest porcelain. When they finally parted, both were breathless, though the kiss had been chaste by any standard. Riley rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. I shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Why not? Josephine asked, equally quiet. Because you're returning to town tomorrow and I'm just a rancher and he struggled for the words, you're educated and refined and meant for better things. Josephine pulled back to look at him properly, her eyes searching his face. Don't presume to tell me what I'm meant for, Riley Kincaid. I came west to make my own choices, not to have them made for me by anyone else, not even by a man who saved my life. A slow smile spread across his face at her spirited response. You're unlike any woman I've ever known, Josephine Calloway. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied, matching his smile with her own. The ride back to the ranch was charged with a new awareness between them. Their hands brushed occasionally on the wagon bench, sending sparks of sensation up Josephine's arm. They talked of inconsequential things, the weather, the coming harvest, stories of the local area, but beneath the mundane conversation flowed an undercurrent of possibility that hadn't existed before. Martha noticed the change immediately when they returned, her keen eyes taking in their flushed cheeks and the way they seemed unable to look directly at each other without smiling. She said nothing, but a knowing expression crossed her face as she busied herself preparing supper. That evening, after the meal was finished and the dishes washed, Riley excused himself to check on a pregnant mare in the barn. Left alone with Martha, Josephine felt suddenly awkward, wondering if the other woman disapproved of what was developing between her and Riley. He's different with you, Martha said abruptly, breaking the silence. Lighter somehow, more like the Riley I remember from before. Before, Josephine echoed. Before Elizabeth died, Martha clarified. He was always serious, responsible had to be, taking over the ranch so young, but he used to laugh more, to see the joy in small things. When we lost her and the baby, it was like a light went out inside him. I'm so sorry, Josephine said softly. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for him, for both of you. Martha nodded, absently folding a dish towel. It nearly broke him. For a while I was afraid he might. She trailed off, then shook her head as if to dispel the memory. But he's strong, my brother. He found a way to keep going even if he wasn't really living anymore. Until now. I don't know what you mean, Josephine said, though a part of her did. Martha fixed her with a direct look. I think you do. I've seen how he looks at you and how you look at him when you think no one's watching. I'm not blind, Josephine. Heat rose in Josephine's cheeks. It's complicated. I'm returning to town tomorrow and my life is there while his is here. Fort Stanton is less than an hour's ride away, Martha pointed out reasonably. And complications have a way of simplifying themselves when people truly want them to. Before Josephine could respond, the back door opened and Riley returned, bringing with him the crisp scent of the night air. He looked between the two women, sensing he had interrupted something significant. Everything all right? He asked. Just fine, Martha assured him, casting Josephine a meaningful glance. I was just heading to bed. Good night, you two. After Martha left, an expectant silence fell. Josephine stood by the fireplace, watching the flames dance while Riley remained near the door, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat. Your sister cares for you a great deal, Josephine said finally, breaking the silence. Martha's been my rock, Riley acknowledged, moving farther into the room. Don't know what I'd have done without her these past years. She told me a little about what happened with Elizabeth, Josephine said hesitantly. I hope you don't mind. Riley's expression tightened momentarily, then relaxed. No, I don't mind. It's part of who I am, part of my story, not a chapter I'm proud of afterward. What do you mean? He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. After they died, I wasn't myself. Drank too much, took risks I shouldn't have. There was a time I didn't much care whether I lived or died. Josephine's heart ached for him. That's understandable given what you'd lost. Maybe, Riley conceded, but it wasn't fair to Martha, having to watch me self-destruct. She finally gave me an ultimatum: either I pulled myself together or she was leaving the ranch. It was the wake-up call I needed. She's a wise woman, Josephine observed. That she is, Riley agreed with a small smile. He hesitated, then moved closer to where Josephine stood. Can I ask you something? Of course. Today, when he gestured vaguely between them, was that just gratitude? For saving your life? Josephine considered the question seriously. No, she said at last. It wasn't gratitude, or at least not just gratitude. Relief visibly washed over his features. Good, because I'd like to call on you properly once you're back in town, if you'd allow it. I'd like that very much, Josephine replied, her heart racing at the formal declaration of his intentions. Riley reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. I know you have a life in Fort Stanton, and I wouldn't ask you to give that up. But perhaps we could find a way to bridge the distance. I think we could, Josephine agreed, squeezing his hand. After all, as your sister pointed out, it's only an hour's ride. A slow smile spread across Riley's face, lighting his eyes from within. So it is. The following morning arrived all too quickly. After breakfast, Riley loaded Josephine's few belongings into the wagon while Martha presented her with a parcel of freshly baked bread and preserves for the coming days. The goodbye between the two women was warm, with promises exchanged to see each other soon. As Riley helped Josephine into the wagon, Martha winked at her and whispered, "Remember what I said about complications." The journey to Fort Stanton passed more quickly than Josephine would have liked. She found herself memorizing the landscape, committing to memory the way the sunlight played across the rolling hills and distant mountains. Beside her, Riley seemed content with the comfortable silence that had developed between them. As they approached the outskirts of town, however, a nervousness began to build in Josephine's chest. How would the townspeople view her return with Riley? Would they gossip? Would it damage her standing as the schoolteacher? Riley, sensing her tension, glanced at her with concern. Second thoughts? No, she assured him quickly, just wondering what people will say. Understanding dawned on his face. Ah, well, if it helps, my reputation in these parts is fairly solid. I'm known as a recluse, not a scoundrel. That startled a laugh from her. It's not your reputation I'm concerned about. It's mine. Teachers are held to certain standards of behavior, especially female teachers. We've done nothing improper, Riley pointed out reasonably. You were injured, and my sister and I provided care until you recovered. That's the beginning and end of what anyone needs to know. Josephine nodded, grateful for his understanding. As they entered Fort Stanton proper, curious gazes turned toward the wagon. News of their arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the small boarding house where Josephine had rooms, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Peterson, the stout, gray-haired proprietress of the boarding house, was the first to reach them, her face a mask of concern. Miss Calloway. We've been so worried. Mr. Kincaid told us of your accident, but seeing you now, she broke off, taking in Josephine's healing cuts and bruises. I'm quite well, Mrs. Peterson, Josephine assured her. Thanks to Mr. Kincaid and his sister, they've shown me tremendous kindness. From the crowd emerged Mayor Hollister, a dignified man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed silver beard. Miss Calloway, welcome back. The children will be delighted to hear you've returned, though perhaps you might want another day or two of rest before resuming your duties. That's very considerate, Mayor, Josephine replied, but I'm quite ready to return to the classroom tomorrow. I've missed my students. If you're certain, the mayor nodded, then turned to Riley with an extended hand. Kincaid, the town owes you a debt of gratitude for assisting our teacher in her time of need. Riley shook the offered hand. Anyone would have done the same, he said modestly. Not with your skill, the mayor countered. I hear you performed quite the feat of horsemanship. As more townspeople pressed forward with questions and well wishes, Josephine found herself separated from Riley. She caught glimpses of him through the crowd, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. When their eyes met briefly, he gave her a small, reassuring smile that warmed her despite the distance between them. Eventually, Mrs. Peterson insisted that Josephine needed rest and shooed away the curious onlookers. As the crowd dispersed, Riley approached once more, hat in hand. I should be heading back, he said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. But I meant what I said yesterday. I'd like to call on you perhaps this Sunday. I'd like that, Josephine replied softly. With a tip of his hat and one last lingering look, Riley mounted the wagon and turned back toward the ranch, leaving Josephine to face the barrage of questions from Mrs. Peterson and the other boarders. The following days passed in a blur as Josephine readjusted to her routine in Fort Stanton. The children were delighted to have her back, and listened with wide eyes as she recounted a carefully edited version of her ordeal. Several of them had drawings to present her childish renderings of her being rescued by a heroic cowboy on horseback. The story, it seemed, had captured the town's imagination. By Sunday, Josephine found herself watching the clock with increasing impatience. Riley had not specified a time for his visit, and as the morning stretched into afternoon, she began to wonder if he had changed his mind. Just as she was convincing herself that he wasn't coming, a knock sounded at the boarding house door. From her window, Josephine saw Riley standing on the porch below, freshly shaved and wearing what appeared to be his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. Heart pounding, she smoothed her hair and checked her appearance one last time in the small mirror above her dresser. The blue dress he had gifted her fit perfectly, thanks to Martha's skilled alterations, and though some bruises still marked her face, They were fading to a yellowish hue that was less dramatic than the purple and black of days past. She descended the stairs just as Mrs. Peterson was showing Riley into the small parlor. The older woman's expression was a mixture of curiosity and approval as she introduced them formally, as if they were meeting for the first time. "Mr. Kincaid to see you, Miss Calloway," she announced unnecessarily. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," Josephine replied politely. Riley's gaze traveled over her appreciatively. "You look lovely," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you," Josephine replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll bring some refreshments. The door remains open, of course," she added with a meaningful look before bustling off toward the kitchen. Left alone, though within sight of anyone passing the parlor doorway, Riley and Josephine shared a smile of mutual amusement at the proprietress's not-so-subtle chaperoning. "How are you feeling?" Riley asked, genuinely concerned. "Much better," Josephine assured him. "The children have been very understanding about my limited mobility this week." "And the townsfolk, have they been kind?" Josephine hesitated. "For the most part, there have been some questions about my stay at your ranch." A frown creased Riley's brow. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing directly inappropriate," she hastened to assure him. "But Mrs. Billings from the general store made a point of mentioning that some people might consider it improper for an unmarried lady to stay in a man's home, even with his sister present." "Mrs. Billings should mind her own business," Riley said, a note of irritation in his voice. "It doesn't matter," Josephine said firmly. "I know the truth of what happened, and so do you. Let people talk if they must." Riley's expression softened. "You continue to surprise me, Josephine Calloway." Mrs. Peterson returned with tea and cookies, effectively ending any further private conversation on the matter. For the next hour, they engaged in polite, superficial dialogue under the watchful eye of the boarding house matron. Yet despite the constraints, Josephine found herself enjoying Riley's company immensely. He was well-spoken and surprisingly knowledgeable about a range of topics, from local politics to literature. When it came time for him to leave, Mrs. Peterson tactfully withdrew to give them a moment of semi-privacy in the entryway. "May I call on you again next Sunday?" Riley asked, taking Josephine's hand in his. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied honestly. A slow smile spread across his face. "Good. And perhaps if you're feeling up to it, we might go for a short ride. There's a spot just outside of town I'd like to show you." "I'd like that," Josephine agreed, though the thought of getting back on a horse sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. Riley seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll bring the most gentle mare we have," he promised, "and we'll take it slowly." "Thank you," Josephine said, squeezing his hand gratefully, with Mrs. Peterson hovering just out of earshot but well within sight. Riley raised Josephine's hand to his lips for a brief, proper kiss, before taking his leave. The gesture, traditional as it was, sent a thrill through Josephine that lingered long after he had gone. The following week passed with agonizing slowness. Josephine threw herself into her teaching, introducing new materials she had been planning before the accident. The children responded enthusiastically, particularly to the geography lessons about the American West. Many had never ventured beyond Fort Stanton and its immediate surroundings, and they listened with rapt attention as Josephine described the vastness and variety of the territories. On Wednesday afternoon, as Josephine was dismissing her students for the day, she was surprised to find Martha Kincaid waiting outside the schoolhouse. "Martha," she exclaimed, genuinely pleased, "what brings you to town?" "Supply run," Martha explained, gesturing to a wagon laden with parcels and sacks. but I also wanted to see how you were faring after your return to civilization. Would you like to come to the boarding house for tea? Josephine invited. Mrs. Peterson makes excellent scones on Wednesdays. I'd like that, Martha agreed with a smile. As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, several townspeople greeted them, their curious gazes lingering on the unexpected pairing. Martha seemed oblivious to the attention, chatting amiably about ranch matters and inquiring after Josephine's recovery. Mrs. Peterson welcomed Martha warmly, if with some surprise, and soon the two women were settled in the parlor with tea and the promised scones. Riley's been insufferable this week, Martha confided once they were alone. Checking the time constantly, finding excuses to ride toward town, then changing his mind at the last minute. I finally told him if he mentioned Sunday once more, I'd personally ensure he was too injured to make the trip. Josephine laughed, delighted by this insight into Riley's anticipation. And has that improved his behavior? Not in the slightest, Martha admitted with a grin. But it did prompt me to come see you myself. I wanted to make sure you were as eager for Sunday as my lovesick brother. A blush crept into Josephine's cheeks. I am looking forward to it, she admitted. Though lovesick seems a bit premature, Martha's expression grew more serious. Perhaps, but I know my brother, Josephine. He doesn't give his heart easily, not since Elizabeth. The fact that he's pursuing you means something significant. We're only just getting to know each other, Josephine protested gently. Of course, Martha agreed, and you should take all the time you need, but I wanted you to understand that for Riley, this isn't casual. Josephine nodded, considering Martha's words carefully. It isn't casual for me either, she admitted finally. Though I scarcely know how to make sense of these feelings, having known him so briefly. Some things don't require years to recognize, Martha said simply. When my late husband first came to work at the ranch, I knew within a week that he was the one for me. Sometimes the heart just knows. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Martha's words stayed with Josephine long after the other woman had departed. Was it possible to know so quickly? To feel so deeply for someone after such a short acquaintance? It seemed implausible, yet Josephine couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened at the mere thought of Riley, or how she found herself daydreaming about their upcoming Sunday ride when she should have been grading arithmetic papers. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for riding. Josephine dressed with special care, selecting a practical but becoming riding habit in forest green that complemented her blonde hair and blue eyes. She braided her hair securely and topped it with a small hat, examining her reflection critically in the mirror. The last visible remnants of her accident were a faint yellowish bruise along her jawline and a healing cut above her left eyebrow, both easily overlooked, unless one was specifically looking for them. Riley arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, leading not one but two horses, his own Palomino stallion and a gentle-looking chestnut mare that reminded Josephine painfully of the horse that had dragged her. Seeing her hesitation, Riley approached her alone. Her name is Buttercup, he said softly. She's the gentlest horse on the ranch. Martha uses her to teach the neighboring children to ride. She looks like... Josephine began, then trailed off. Like the one that spooked, Riley finished for her. I know. I thought about that, but then I decided it might be better this way to face that fear directly, with a horse of similar appearance but completely different temperament. Josephine considered this, then nodded resolutely. You're right. I can't avoid chestnut mares forever. Riley's face broke into a relieved smile. That's the spirit, and I'll be right beside you every step of the way. With gentle patience, he helped her mount, making sure she was securely seated before handing her the reins. Remember, he said, Buttercup responds to the slightest touch. There's no need to be forceful with her. Josephine nodded, gripping the reins with white-knuckled hands. Riley mounted his own horse in one fluid motion, then guided his stallion alongside Buttercup. "We'll start slow," he promised. "Just around the town square first to get you comfortable again." True to his word, they proceeded at a walking pace, circumnavigating the town square twice before Josephine felt her initial terror begin to subside. The mare beneath her was indeed gentle, responding to the lightest pressure of the reins or shift of Josephine's weight in the saddle. "You're doing wonderfully," Riley encouraged as they completed the second circuit. Ready to venture a bit farther, Josephine took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yes, I think so." They headed east out of town, following a well-traveled road that eventually gave way to a narrower trail winding through scrubby pinyon pines and juniper. The landscape opened up around them, vast, rugged, and hauntingly beautiful in its stark simplicity. As they rode, Riley pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history. He knew the land intimately, from the names of the distant mountain peaks to the hidden springs that sustained wildlife during the driest months. "You love it here," Josephine observed as they paused to rest the horses in the shade of a large boulder. Riley nodded, his gaze sweeping across the panoramic view. "I do. It's in my blood, I suppose. My father used to say that once the West gets hold of you, it never lets go." "I'm beginning to understand that feeling," Josephine admitted. "When I first arrived, I found it all so alien, the vastness, the harshness. But now I see the beauty in it." "And does it feel like home yet?" Riley asked, his tone casual though his eyes were intent on her face. "More and more each day," Josephine replied honestly. They continued riding for another hour, gradually climbing to a ridge that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Fort Stanton was visible in the distance, a tiny cluster of buildings dwarfed by the immensity of the landscape. "This is what I wanted to show you," Riley said as they dismounted. He secured the horses to a nearby tree, then led Josephine to the edge of the ridge. The vista before them was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to the valley floor, with the ribbon of the Bonito River winding through it like a silver thread. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows and bathed everything in a golden glow. "It's magnificent," Josephine breathed, instinctively reaching for Riley's hand. He took it, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I come here sometimes when I need perspective," he told her. "Problems that seem insurmountable at ground level look different from up here." They stood in companionable silence for a time, hands linked, shoulders touching, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The air was clear and still, scented with pine and sage. "Thank you for bringing me here," Josephine said finally. "And for helping me get back on a horse. I was afraid I might never find the courage." "You're braver than you give yourself credit for," Riley replied, turning to face her fully. "Coming west alone, building a new life, facing your fears, those aren't the actions of someone lacking courage." His eyes, green as the pines that dotted the landscape, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised his free hand to her cheek, his touch feather light against her skin. "Josephine," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "Yes," she whispered, scarcely daring to breathe. "I find myself thinking about you constantly," he confessed. "When I'm mending fences or branding cattle or lying awake at night, you're there in my thoughts. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I can't pretend that what I feel for you is anything less than it is." "And what is it?" Josephine asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Love," Riley said simply. "I'm falling in love with you, Josephine Calloway." faster and deeper than I ever thought possible. The world seemed to still around them as his words hung in the air. Josephine felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. When she finally found her voice, it was steady and sure. "I'm falling in love with you too, Riley Kincaid." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds, radiant and transformative. With gentle reverence, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that started sweet and tender but quickly deepened as Josephine wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Riley rested his forehead against hers, his arm still encircling her waist. "I should probably take you back to town," he said regretfully, "before Mrs. Peterson sends out a search party." Josephine laughed, though she made no move to release him. "Probably. Though I'm tempted to stay right here indefinitely." "A tempting proposition," Riley agreed with a smile, "but I have a feeling the reputation you're so concerned about might suffer irreparable damage if we did." "A fair point," Josephine conceded, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. "Though at this moment, I find I care considerably less about my reputation than I probably should." Riley's eyes darkened at her words, and for a moment, Josephine thought he might pull her back into his arms. Instead, he took a deep breath and offered his hand to help her back to the horses. "Come on," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "before I forget my gentlemanly intentions entirely." The ride back to Fort Stanton was filled with stolen glances and brushing hands, innocent touches that carried new meaning in light of their confessions. They spoke of everyday things: Josephine's students, Riley's plans for the upcoming cattle drive, books they had read and places they hoped to see someday. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation flowed a current of deeper understanding, a shared recognition of the path they had started down together. As they approached the outskirts of town, reality began to intrude on their private idyll. Josephine was acutely aware of curious gazes following their progress down the main street, of whispers behind hands as they passed. "They're talking," she observed quietly. "Let them," Riley replied with a shrug. "We've done nothing to be ashamed of." "I know," Josephine agreed. "It's just, I'm still getting established here as the teacher. I don't want anything to jeopardize that." Riley's expression grew serious. "Josephine, if my attentions are causing you difficulties—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "That's not what I meant. I'm not ashamed of us. I just need to be mindful of appearances for the sake of my position." "I understand," Riley nodded. "We'll proceed with all proper decorum. Sunday visits, chaperoned outings, whatever propriety demands." "Thank you," Josephine said, relieved by his understanding. They reached the boarding house just as the sun was setting. Riley helped Josephine dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Mrs. Peterson appeared on the porch as if summoned by some sixth sense for potential impropriety. "You're back just in time for supper, Miss Calloway," she called. "Good evening, Mr. Kincaid." "Good evening, Mrs. Peterson," Riley replied politely, tipping his hat. To Josephine, he added in a lower voice, "Sunday next." "I'll count the days," she promised softly. With one last lingering look, Riley mounted his horse and led Buttercup away, leaving Josephine to face Mrs. Peterson's barely concealed curiosity and the knowing glances of her fellow boarders at the supper table. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Riley would come to Fort Stanton every Sunday, taking Josephine for rides or walks or occasionally to the small church that served the community. Their courtship proceeded with all outward propriety, though the feelings between them deepened with each meeting. By late summer, their relationship was the subject of much good-natured speculation in Fort Stanton. The general consensus, as relayed to Josephine by her fellow teacher, Miss Winters, was that they made a handsome couple and that a wedding before Christmas seemed likely. A wedding, Josephine had repeated, startled by the assumption. We've only been courting for a few months. Time moves differently out here, Miss Winters had replied with a knowing smile. People don't waste it once they've found the right match. The conversation had left Josephine thoughtful. Marriage had always been an abstract concept in her mind, something that would happen someday, in some distant future. Yet when she tried to imagine that future now, it was Riley she saw by her side, Riley whose children she would bear, Riley's ranch that would become her home. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet certainty that grew stronger with each passing day. September brought the start of a new school term and with it, new challenges. The number of students had increased, including several children from outlying ranches who boarded in town during the week. Josephine found herself working longer hours, preparing lessons and grading assignments, sometimes too tired by evening to do more than eat a simple supper before falling into bed. Riley was understanding about her increased workload, sometimes bringing her dinner at the schoolhouse when she worked late or simply sitting quietly in the classroom, whittling or reading while she graded papers. His presence was comforting rather than distracting, and Josephine found she worked better with him there, drawing strength from his steady support. One crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods along the river, Riley arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual. Josephine was just dismissing her students when he appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, a nervous energy about him that she had never seen before. "Riley," she questioned as the last child scampered out. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her quickly. I was wondering if you might come for a ride with me. There's something I'd like to show you." Now, Josephine glanced at the stack of arithmetic papers on her desk. "I should really finish grading these." "The papers will wait," Riley said, an unusual insistence in his tone. "Please, Josephine." "It's important." Intrigued by his earnestness, Josephine agreed. They rode out of town, not toward the ridge where they had first confessed their feelings, but in the direction of the Lazy K. Josephine had visited the ranch several times over the past months, usually on Saturdays when she could stay longer without raising eyebrows in town. Martha always welcomed her warmly, and the place had come to feel like a second home. Today, however, Riley led her past the main house and barn, continuing along a trail that wound through a stand of pines before opening onto a small meadow. In the center of the clearing stood a partially constructed cabin, its log walls rising about waist-high, with stacks of additional lumber nearby. "What's this?" Josephine asked, puzzled by the unexpected building. Riley dismounted and came to help her down from Buttercup. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "It's a house," he said, "or it will be when it's finished." "I can see that," Josephine laughed. "But whose house? Are you expecting new ranch hands?" "No," Riley said, taking her hand and leading her closer to the structure. "It's for us, if you'll have me." Josephine stopped abruptly, her heart pounding. "Riley," he turned to face her fully, still holding her hand in his. "I know this isn't exactly how this is typically done. I should be calling on your father, asking his permission. I should have a ring ready. But nothing about us has been entirely conventional from the start, has it?" A smile tugged at Josephine's lips despite her racing pulse. "No, I suppose not." Riley took a deep breath, then continued. "I started building this place the day after I brought you back to town. I know it was presumptuous, but I couldn't help myself. The thought of you here making a life with me, it gave me something to work toward, something to hope for." He gestured toward the unfinished walls. "It's not much yet, but it will be. 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen for you, windows facing east to catch the morning sun like you said you loved. It's close enough to the main house that you won't be isolated, but far enough for privacy." Tears had begun to form in Josephine's eyes as he spoke. Misinterpreting them, Riley's expression fell. "It's too soon," he said quickly. "I'm pushing too hard. Forgive me, Josephine, we can wait as long as you need." "No," Josephine said, finding her voice at last. "It's not too soon. It's perfect." Hope dawned in Riley's eyes. "Does that mean—" "Ask me properly," Josephine whispered. "Ask me the question, Riley." With a smile that could have outshone the sun, Riley dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "Josephine Calloway, I love you more than I ever thought it possible to love anyone. You've brought light and laughter back into my life when I thought those things were lost to me forever. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Josephine said without hesitation, tears of joy now flowing freely. "Yes, Riley Kincaid, I will marry you." He rose to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed with sheer happiness. When he set her down, it was only to kiss her with a passion that left them both breathless. "I do have a ring," Riley confessed when they finally separated. "It was my mother's. Martha has been keeping it safe. I just wanted to show you the house first to make sure you approved." "It's wonderful," Josephine assured him, looking around at what would become their home. "When do you think it will be finished?" "Before Christmas, if the weather holds," Riley said. "Sooner with help. Several of the neighboring ranchers have offered to lend a hand with the raising." "Christmas," Josephine repeated thoughtfully. "So we could be married." "New Year's Day," Riley suggested. "A fresh start, a new beginning for both of us." "New Year's Day," Josephine agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I can't think of anything more perfect." They lingered in the meadow as the afternoon sun began to set, sitting on the foundation of what would be their home, planning their future together. Riley spoke of his hopes for the ranch, of the improvements he'd been saving for, of the children he hoped they would have someday. Josephine shared her dreams of continuing to teach, perhaps even starting a small school on the ranch for their children and those of neighboring families. "Whatever you want," Riley promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever makes you happy." "You make me happy," Josephine said simply. "Everything else is just details." The announcement of their engagement was met with enthusiastic approval in Fort Stanton. Mayor Hollister offered the use of the town hall for the wedding reception, and the ladies of the church auxiliary immediately formed a committee to handle the decorations and refreshments. Martha was ecstatic at the news, hugging Josephine fiercely when Riley brought her to the ranch that evening to properly present his mother's ring, a delicate band of gold with a small but perfect diamond that caught the light when Josephine moved her hand. "I've been hoping for this since the day he brought you here half dead," Martha confessed. "I saw something in his eyes when he looked at you that I hadn't seen since before Elizabeth died. It was like watching him come back to life." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Josephine continued teaching while also helping with the completion of their cabin whenever she could spare the time. The women of Fort Stanton organized a quilting bee to create a wedding quilt for the couple, and Martha presented Josephine with carefully preserved linens that had been part of her own trousseau. As the cabin neared completion, Josephine spent more and more time at the ranch, helping to furnish and decorate what would soon be her home. Riley had been true to his word about the design. The east-facing windows in the bedroom caught the first rays of the morning sun, and the kitchen was spacious enough for Josephine to teach Martha the Boston recipes her mother had passed down to her. December brought snow to the mountains and a crisp chill to the air. The cabin was finished just before Christmas, as Riley had promised, complete with a stone fireplace and sturdy furnishings crafted by Riley's own hands or purchased on special trips to Santa Fe. Christmas itself was celebrated at the main ranch house, with Martha preparing a feast that would have impressed even the finest Boston hostess. Josephine had invited Mrs. Peterson and Miss Winters to join them, and the small gathering was filled with warmth and laughter. As they sat around the fire after dinner, Riley presented Josephine with her Christmas gift, a beautiful rocking chair for the cabin's main room. "For when we have children," he explained softly. "My mother always said there was nothing more soothing than rocking a baby to sleep." Josephine's eyes filled with tears at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her hand over the smooth wood. "I can't wait to use it." Her gift to him was a handsome leather-bound journal and pen set. "For recording the ranch's history," she told him, "and our families as the years pass." Riley's kiss of thanks, though chaste in deference to their audience, carried a promise of deeper passions yet to come. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, with a fresh dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. At the small church in Fort Stanton, Josephine stood before the mirror in the back room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Her wedding dress, sewn by Martha and several ladies from town, was a vision of ivory satin and lace. Her golden hair was arranged in an intricate updo, crowned with a circlet of winter roses and greenery. Around her neck hung a simple pearl pendant, her mother's, the only piece of jewelry she had brought with her from Boston. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting the fall of the veil. "Like something from a fairy tale." "I feel like I'm in one," Josephine admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is happening, that I found him or he found me out here in the middle of nowhere." "Not nowhere," Martha corrected gently. "Home." The word resonated in Josephine's heart. "Yes," she agreed. "Home." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Riley, standing at the altar in a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean strength, watched with undisguised adoration as Josephine walked toward him on the arm of Mayor Hollister, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. Their vows, spoken in clear, steady voices, were traditional yet deeply personal. When Riley slipped the gold band onto Josephine's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were sure and steady. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both reverent and passionate, a fitting beginning to their life together. The reception at the town hall was a joyous affair. It seemed the entire population of Fort Stanton and the surrounding ranches had turned out to celebrate. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and toasts, laughter and tears of joy. As the evening wore on, Riley found Josephine standing by the window, watching the snow begin to fall outside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Kincaid?" he asked softly, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. The new name sent a thrill through Josephine. "Mrs. Kincaid," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "Yes, I think I am." They said their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. Outside, Riley had a surprise waiting, a sleigh, complete with bells and fur blankets for the journey to the ranch. "To start our marriage in style," he explained, helping her into the sleigh. As they glided through the snow-covered landscape, Josephine nestled against her husband's side, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky above. She thought of the strange and wondrous path that had brought her here from Boston society to a frontier schoolhouse, from a terrifying accident to the arms of a man who had quite literally saved her life. "Happy?" Riley asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Josephine assured him. "And you?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," he replied honestly. As the sleigh crested the hill, the lights of their cabin came into view. Martha had gone ahead to light lamps and stoke the fire, ensuring their new home would be warm and welcoming for their arrival. The sight of it, their home, their future, filled Josephine with a profound sense of rightness. "I love you, Riley Kincaid," she said, turning to look into the eyes of the man who had become her husband. "With all that I am." "And I love you, Josephine Kincaid," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for all the days of my life." Their kiss, shared beneath a canopy of stars with the sleigh bells jingling softly in the crisp winter air, was a promise and a beginning, the first of countless such moments in the life they would build together in this wild and beautiful land that had brought them to each other in the most unexpected of ways. As spring blossomed across the New Mexico territory, bringing new growth and renewal to the land, the Kincaid Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Josephine had adapted to ranch life with surprising ease, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for Riley and the hands, then spending her days divided between household management and teaching at a small school she had established in one of the ranch outbuildings for the children of neighboring families. Riley watched his wife with constant amazement. The woman who had once been dragged half to death across this rugged land now moved through it with confidence and grace, as if she had been born to the frontier rather than the refined parlors of Boston. She had taken to riding again with determination, overcoming her fear through sheer force of will, though she now favored a gentle gray mare rather than any chestnut horse. Their life together settled into rhythms dictated by the seasons and the demands of the ranch. Summer brought long days of hard work under the hot sun, cattle drives and fence mending, preserving fruits and vegetables from Josephine's newly established garden. Fall brought harvest and preparation for the winter ahead, with evenings spent by the fire, reading aloud to each other from favorite books or simply talking of their days. Winter, their first as husband and wife, brought deep snows and cozy intimacy days when they rarely left the warmth of their cabin, discovering each other anew with each passing day. They learned the language of each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had learned the contours of each other's minds, finding in their physical union the same perfect harmony they had discovered in their emotional connection. By the time the spring wildflowers carpeted the meadows in a riot of color, Josephine had news to share. "A baby," Riley repeated when she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes," Josephine confirmed, her eyes shining with joy and trepidation. "In late October, the doctor thinks." For a moment, a shadow crossed Riley's face, a flicker of remembered pain from his past loss. But then his expression cleared, replaced by wonder and fierce protection. "A baby," he said again, this time with certainty and joy. Dropping to his knees before her chair, he placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Are you happy?" Josephine asked, knowing the complex emotions this news must evoke for him. "Beyond words," Riley assured her, looking up into her eyes, "and scared out of my mind." "Me too," Josephine admitted with a small laugh. "But we'll face it together like everything else." "Together," Riley agreed, rising to kiss her tenderly. The news of Josephine's pregnancy was greeted with delight by Martha and the entire community of Fort Stanton. Women who had been through childbirth themselves offered advice and support, while Martha began knitting tiny garments with tireless enthusiasm. As Josephine's body changed, growing round with new life, Riley's attentiveness increased tenfold. He insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch so that she wouldn't overexert herself, and he frequently found excuses to check on her during the day, bringing her flowers or simply stealing a kiss before returning to his work. You're going to wear a path between the barn and the cabin if you keep this up. Josephine teased him one September afternoon as he appeared at the door for the third time that day. Just making sure my wife and child are comfortable, Riley defended himself good-naturedly. Is that such a crime? Not a crime, Josephine laughed, placing his hand on her rounded belly where their child was currently performing what felt like acrobatics. But hardly necessary every hour on the hour. Riley's face softened as he felt the strong kicks against his palm. Active little thing, isn't it? Like his father, Josephine said fondly. Always in motion. His, Riley questioned with a raised eyebrow. You sound certain. Josephine shrugged. Just a feeling, we'll know soon enough. As her due date approached, Josephine found herself reflecting often on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place, to this life, that was so different from anything she had imagined for herself growing up in Boston. If her horse hadn't spooked that day, if Riley hadn't happened to be tracking that mountain lion in the same area, if he hadn't possessed the riding skills to save her. So many ifs, all leading to this moment of perfect contentment. When her labor began on a crisp October morning, Josephine faced it with the same determination she had shown in all aspects of her new life. Martha sent for the midwife from Fort Stanton while Riley paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, barred from entry by feminine tradition. The labor was long and difficult. Through the closed door, Riley could hear Josephine's cries of pain, each one cutting him to the quick. As hours stretched into the night, his fear grew. History seemed poised to repeat itself in the cruelest way possible, and he found himself praying with a fervor he hadn't known since childhood, begging any power that might listen to spare Josephine and their child. Just before dawn, after 18 grueling hours, a new cry pierced the night, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Riley froze, scarcely daring to hope until Martha emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but radiant. You have a son, Riley, she announced. A strong, healthy boy, and Josephine is fine, exhausted, but fine. The relief that flooded through him was so intense that Riley's legs nearly gave way beneath him. With trembling hands, he accepted Martha's embrace, tears flowing freely down his face. Can I see them? He asked hoarsely. Of course, Martha said, stepping aside. They're waiting for you. The scene that greeted Riley as he entered the bedroom would be forever etched in his memory. Josephine, pale but triumphant, propped against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. When she looked up at him, her smile was tired but radiant. Come meet your son, she invited softly on unsteady legs. Riley approached the bed, sinking down beside his wife. With gentle hands, she transferred the swaddled infant into his arms. Riley looked down at the tiny face, perfect in every detail: the button nose, the rosebud mouth, the shock of dark hair that promised to be as black as his own. He's beautiful, Riley whispered, awe evident in his voice. Perfect. We thought we might name him William, Josephine said. After my father. William Robert Kincaid. William, Riley repeated, testing the name as he traced a gentle finger down his son's soft cheek. It suits him. As if in response to his father's touch, the baby's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of the clearest blue, identical to Josephine's. For a breathless moment, father and son regarded each other, a silent recognition passing between them. He has your eyes, Riley said, looking up at Josephine with wonder. And your hair, she replied with a tired smile. Poor child is stuck with the best and worst of both of us. Riley laughed softly, carefully returning the baby to Josephine's arms before leaning in to kiss her with all the love and gratitude he felt. Thank you, he murmured against her lips, for our son, for everything. Thank you for saving me that day, Josephine replied simply. So that we could have this. The days and weeks following William's birth were a blur of adjustment and joy. Josephine recovered her strength quickly, and the baby proved to have his mother's determination and his father's healthy constitution. Riley found himself captivated by his son's every movement, every expression, spending hours simply watching the tiny boy sleep or nursing at Josephine's breast. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around William's needs, but the bond between Riley and Josephine only deepened through the shared experience of parenthood. If possible, Riley found himself loving his wife even more as he watched her tenderness with their son, her patience during sleepless nights, her unwavering commitment to their family. As William's first birthday approached, bringing with it the anniversary of their wedding, Riley found himself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past 2 years. From the moment he had spotted Josephine being dragged across the rugged terrain, her life hanging by a literal thread, to this moment of profound contentment, it seemed both an eternity and the blink of an eye. On the morning of their anniversary, Riley rose before dawn, careful not to wake Josephine or the baby. He slipped outside into the crisp January air and made his way to the stable, where he saddled his palomino and rode to the ridge where they had first confessed their love. The sun was just beginning to color the eastern horizon when he returned, a small bundle of winter wildflowers in his hand, the same kind that had grown in the meadow where Josephine's horse had spooked 2 years earlier, setting their story in motion. He found her in the rocking chair he had given her that first Christmas, nursing William in the soft light of early morning. The sight of them together, his wife, his son, in the home they had built filled Riley with a contentment so complete it almost hurt. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said softly, presenting the flowers with a small bow. Josephine looked up, her face lighting with pleasure. "You remembered. How could I forget the day that made me the happiest man in the territory?" Riley replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. To William, he added, "Good morning, little man. Taking good care of your mother, I see." The baby unlatched from Josephine's breast to offer his father a milky grin, revealing the 2 teeth that had recently appeared in his lower gum. Riley's heart swelled with pride and love. Later that evening, after William had been settled in his crib, Riley and Josephine sat together on the porch, wrapped in a quilt against the winter chill, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Would you believe me if I told you I have another surprise for you?" Josephine asked, her voice soft in the stillness. Riley turned to look at her, curiosity piqued. "Another surprise? You've already given me the best anniversary gift I could ask for you and William, healthy and happy." Josephine smiled, a secret joy lighting her eyes. "Well, this is related to that. Come next summer, William is going to be a big brother." For a moment, Riley stared at her in disbelief. Then, with a whoop of joy that probably startled the cattle in the nearest pasture, he gathered her into his arms, quilt and all. "Another baby," he exclaimed. "Josephine, you are the most amazing woman," she laughed at his enthusiasm. "I take it you're pleased with the news." "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it," Riley assured her, his hand finding its way to her still flat stomach in a gesture that had become familiar during her first pregnancy. "When?" "August, Dr. Peterson thinks," Josephine replied. "So William will be about 1.5 years older." "A perfect age difference," Riley nodded approvingly. "They'll be playmates as well as brothers." "Or brother and sister," Josephine pointed out with a smile. "We won't know for a while yet." "Brother and sister," Riley repeated thoughtfully. "A little girl with your golden hair and blue eyes. Now there's a thought to keep a father up at night, worrying about future suitors." Josephine laughed at the mock concern on his face. "She'd have you wrapped around her little finger within minutes of her birth." "Without question," Riley agreed readily. Just like her mother, they sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future bright with promise and love. "Did you ever imagine, when you rode out that day and found me being dragged half dead across the ground, that we'd end up here?" Josephine asked softly. Married with a son and another child on the way, Riley considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "I couldn't have imagined this. After Elizabeth, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. I never expected to love again, let alone to build a family." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "But from the moment I cut you free and saw you looking up at me with those incredible blue eyes, even battered and bloody as you were, something shifted inside me. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope." Josephine's eyes glistened with unshed tears at his words. "And now?" "What do you feel now?" Riley's answer was simple and profound. "Complete." As the stars continued their ancient dance overhead, Riley and Josephine Kincaid held each other close, grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a spooked horse, a desperate race, a skillful rescue that had saved not just one life but two hearts that had been drifting, separate and incomplete, until they found each other in the vast wilderness of the New Mexico territory. Their story, which had begun with danger and pain, had transformed into one of deep love and abiding joy, proof that sometimes the most harrowing beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Or rather, not endings at all, but beginnings that continue to unfold with each passing day, each new challenge faced together, each moment of shared happiness multiplied by being shared. And as they made their way back into their cabin, hand in hand, they carried with them the certainty that whatever the future might hold, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful day together, stronger for having found each other, blessed beyond measure by the love they shared and the family they were building in this wild and beautiful land they both now called home.